The ground started to move, not from an explosion, not from artillery. The ground moved the way a table moves when something very heavy walks toward it across the floor above, a deep tremor beneath the boots. Regular, rhythmic, growing. Paul felt it too. He looked at me from across the foxhole, said nothing and reached for his rifle. That was enough. I had been in Russia for over a year. I had been at Uman, at Kiev, at Odessa. I had heard artillery barrages that lasted 6 hours. I had heard Stukas and Stalin organs and the particular sound a man makes when shrapnel finds him in the dark. But I had not heard this before. Not like this. Not coming from the West when the West was supposed to be ours. If you want to listen to this story in full, in a continuous audiobook format, without interruptions or ads, I've left it in the description. There's also a version that includes a written copy of the story if you prefer to read along. And of course, it's also a direct way to support our work since the channel isn't monetized. Let's continue. The Unteroffizier Helbig appeared at the edge of the foxhole. His face told me what his mouth had not yet found the words to say. He pointed west with 2 fingers and said something about tanks, about how many. He held up both hands, spread all fingers, and then pointed again. More than that, his voice was flat and precise in the way voices get when panic is being held down by force. I looked west. The steppe rolled flat for kilometers in every direction. It was the kind of country that offered nothing. No trees, no hills, no cover beyond the shallow ravines cut by rain and the foxholes we had scraped out of the hard earth through the night. The grass was yellow and dry. The sky above was the pale, washed-out blue of the Russian summer, already burning hot at this hour. And across that flat yellow country, perhaps 2 kilometers out, moving in a line that stretched north and south across our entire field of view, were the tanks. I counted what I could see. I stopped counting at 20. There were more behind those, further back, their hulls still hidden by the slight fold of the ground. The T-34s were broad and low, and the morning sun caught the flat planes of their armor in a way that made them look less like machines and more like something geological. Something that had always been there and had only now decided to move. Behind the tanks, on foot, keeping pace, came the infantry, hundreds of them. Fixed bayonets caught the light. The pack gun crew 30 meters to my left were still trying to maneuver their piece into position. I could hear the crew chief shouting. The gun's trail had caught in the loose soil. They were working fast, 2 men on each wheel, but I already understood what Helbig already understood and what the pack crew were about to understand. There was not enough time. There had never been enough time. The order to advance had come to us in the dark. We had moved through the night across ground we could not see, and now the enemy was here, and the guns were not ready, and the ground was still trembling. Helbig dropped into the foxhole next to Paul. He said something about holding position, about waiting until they were close, about the stick grenades stacked at the forward edge of the hole. I looked at the grenades, 6 of them. And then I looked at the tanks again, at the line of T-34s grinding across the steppe toward us, their engines now audible as a low, continuous thunder that was becoming a roar. And I thought about what 6 stick grenades meant against armor plate 30 centimeters thick. The first shots came from the north. Someone with a pack had managed to deploy in time. I heard the flat crack of the gun, and then the sharper sound of the round striking steel, and then nothing. The tank it hit did not stop. It turned slightly, almost lazily, as if the shot had been a minor inconvenience, and continued forward. More shots, more impacts. One T-34 slowed and began to smoke from the engine compartment, then stopped. The crew did not get out. The others came on without changing pace. They were close enough now that I could see the individual track links moving, the way the hull rocked slightly on the uneven ground, the antenna whipping above the turret. The noise had become something physical, a pressure in the chest, a vibration in the teeth. The infantry behind the tanks was running now, closing the gap. The machine guns opened up from both sides, ours and theirs. The steppe grass jumped and shredded where the rounds hit. A man 50 meters to my right rose up from his foxhole, fired once, and then was gone. I did not see what happened to him. There was too much to see. Helbig was yelling. Something about the left flank. Something about Kuhnfels. The words came to me in pieces through the noise. The first tank crossed our line. It did not stop for the foxholes. It did not go around them. The T-34 rolled directly over the position 6 meters to my right without slowing, the left track dropping into the hole and then crushing forward and out the other side. And from that position there was a sound I will not describe, and then the tank was past and still moving, and the position was gone. I was already up and moving before I understood that I was moving. The foxhole was no longer safe. The foxhole was a grave. I ran left along the line toward Helbig, keeping low, and the ground around me was alive with impacts, rounds from the Soviet infantry punching divots in the dry earth. A T-34 passed 20 meters to my right, its turret traversing slowly, the main gun firing at something I could not see. The pressure of the muzzle blast hit me sideways, and I stumbled and went down on one knee and came back up. Helbig had pulled back to a small fold in the ground, barely deep enough to lie in, barely enough to hide a man. He had 3 others with him. Power was one of them. The 5th man I did not know by name. He was holding his arm against his chest and his face was wrong. The T-34s were through the main line. They were behind us now as much as in front. The Soviet infantry had come in behind the armor, and they were among the foxholes with bayonets, and the fighting had stopped being anything organized and had become something else entirely. Something that happened in small circles of a few meters, man against man, the noise so complete that I could not hear myself and could only feel the impact of my own boots against the ground. A Soviet soldier came out of the grass 10 meters ahead. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. What happened next took less than 2 seconds, and I've thought about it many times, and I'm still not certain of the exact sequence, only that afterward he was on the ground and I was not, and that I was already moving again before I had fully understood that it was over. I reached Helbig's position. I went down beside Power. To the north, perhaps 200 meters away, a park gun fired once and then was silent. To the south, the machine gun that had been firing from the flank went silent too. First the sound of it and then the echo, and then nothing where there had been something. The T-34s were past us. They were rolling east, deeper into the regiment's rear, toward Verkhne-Buzinovka, toward the artillery positions, toward the supply columns. We could hear them going. The infantry had moved through too, most of it, following the tanks, though there were still Soviet soldiers moving through the grass and the destroyed positions and the craters and the dead. Helbig pressed himself flat and spoke quietly to the man beside him. He was counting something. Moving his lips, he raised his head just enough to see over the fold of ground, looked north and south along what had been our line, then put his head back down. He told us to stay still, to wait. His voice was the same flat, precise voice as before, held down by the same force. I lay in the grass with my cheek against the hot, dry earth, and I could still feel the vibration of the tank engines through the ground beneath me, fainter now, moving away. The sky above was still that pale, washed-out blue, still burning. It was not yet 8 in the morning. From somewhere to the north, from the direction of the regiment's other battalions, the firing continued. It had a different quality to it now, less of an exchange, more of one side talking and the other not answering. I looked at Poor. He was looking at the 5 of us in that fold of ground. I could see him arriving at the same number I had just arrived at. 5 men. From this position, in this fold of ground, we could see perhaps 300 meters of what had been the battalion's front. In those 300 meters, we could see no one else moving who was wearing our uniform. Helbig had arrived at the same number. He did not say anything about it. There was nothing to say about it yet. He checked his ammunition, said something to the man with the injured arm, and then turned his attention back to the ground to the south, where the Soviet infantry was still moving. We waited. The engines faded. The sound of the guns to the north thinned and separated until there were only individual shots, spaced apart, which was worse than continuous fire in ways that were hard to name. The July sun climbed. The grass was very still. We lay there for a long time, long enough for the sun to move and the shadows to shorten and the heat to become a weight pressing down on the back of the neck. The man with the injured arm had stopped making noise, which was either better or worse. I could not tell which and did not ask. Helbig moved first. He rose to one knee, looked east and then west, then north along the ruined line, and came to whatever decision he had been working toward. He pointed at Paul and then at me, and made a gesture I understood without words. We were going to move through the positions. We were going to find out what was left. What was left was not much. The first foxhole we reached was the one I had seen the tank cross. I looked at it for a moment and then I looked away, and I did not look back. The second had been abandoned. The rifle was still there, one boot, a letter that had been half burned at some point and then stopped burning. I did not touch it. The third had two men in it who were alive, one of them conscious and the other not, and we got them out and moved them back toward Helbig's fold in the ground. We worked north along the line for perhaps 400 meters. It took a long time. There was still Soviet infantry moving through the area in ones and twos, soldiers who had come through with the tanks and had not yet pulled back. Twice we went flat in the grass and waited while small groups passed within 50 meters. Once, to the east, there was a burst of automatic fire and shouting that lasted perhaps 20 seconds and then ended. We did not know what it meant, and there was no way to find out. The puck gun that had fired from the north was destroyed. The barrel was intact, but the breech had been hit by something large, and the crew were not there. I found one of them 15 meters away in the grass. The other two I did not find. Power said something quiet about the ammunition beside the gun. There were 11 rounds still in the crate. We took them, though we no longer had a gun to put them in. It seemed important to take them anyway. Paul agreed. By the time we worked our way back south, past our starting point and another 200 meters beyond, we had collected 11 men. Not all of them were capable of fighting. The man with the arm, his name was Riedel, I had learned this in the last hour, had a bad break above the elbow, bone showing, and he was grey-faced and moving on will alone. Another man, a Gefreiter whose name I never learned, had taken shrapnel across both legs and could walk only by leaning on a rifle held sideways like a crutch. Helbig gathered us in a shallow ravine no wider than 3 meters, barely enough depth to sit in without being skylined. He looked at each man for a moment. He was tallying something more than numbers. He counted rounds. He asked about water. Nobody had much. The Soviet infantry had moved through the area quickly, following the tanks, and had not stopped to loot the positions, which meant whatever rations and canteens were still in, the foxholes were still there. But the foxholes were spread across 400 meters of ground that was not yet clear, and going back for them was a calculation nobody wanted to make yet. I had half a canteen. The water was warm and had the flat mineral taste of the local wells, the ones that had not been fouled before we arrived. I thought about how far east the tanks were by now. I thought about the artillery positions and the supply columns behind us. I did not say this to anyone. The firing to the north had stopped entirely. That was the detail that settled on all of us at roughly the same moment. Not an exchange ending, not a firefight tailing off. Just silence where there had been sound, and nothing to explain it except the explanations none of us wanted to name out loud. The 3rd Battalion had gone in on the left, the 2nd on the right. The firing from those directions had been heavy when the attack first hit, the kind of noise that meant a fight was happening, that meant resistance. And now there was nothing. Helbig turned to look north for a long moment. Then he turned back. He told us what we were going to do. We were going to work east, back toward the regiment's rear, back toward whatever remained of the support elements. We were going to move in pairs, using the ravines where there were ravines, using the grass where there were no ravines. We were going to bring the wounded. We were not going to use the road. Nobody argued. There was nothing to argue with. We moved in a loose line, Helbig at the front, power covering the rear. I was in the middle, helping Riedel, who had looped his good arm over my shoulder and was moving with a kind of locked-jaw determination that I recognized and respected. He did not speak. His breathing was the only sound he made, and I tried not to listen too closely to the quality of it. The steppe gave us almost nothing. The grass was knee-high in some places, barely ankle-high in others, and the ravines ran in unpredictable directions, cut by water that was no longer there. Twice we found positions that had been Soviet earlier in the week, shallow scrapes with the remains of fires and empty ammunition cases marked with Cyrillic stenciling. Once we found a dead horse, already beginning to swell in the heat, the smell hitting us from 40 meters away and staying with us long after we had passed. We had been moving for perhaps 40 minutes when Paw, behind us, made a sound that was not a word. We all went down. To the south, moving parallel to us at roughly 300 meters, was a group of Soviet soldiers, a dozen of them, perhaps more, moving east. Moving in the same direction we were moving. They were not looking our way. They were moving fast, purposeful, not patrolling but going somewhere specific, following orders that had been given before this morning, orders that were still in effect regardless of what had happened to our line. We lay in the grass and watched them move. Riedel had gone very still beside me, his face turned toward the ground, breathing through his mouth. Someone behind me had clicked his safety off, and I put my hand back without looking and found a wrist and pressed down once, and he understood. The Soviet soldiers did not change direction, did not slow. They moved through our field of view and out the other side and became a smudge against the yellow grass and then nothing. Helbig waited another 2 minutes by count. Then he rose, and we moved. We found the first of our own soldiers 20 minutes later. 2 men from another company, neither of whom I knew, crouched in a ravine with a machine gun they had managed to carry out intact. They had ammunition for it. They knew roughly where the regimental position had been established as a fallback. They had not been able to reach it because there were Soviet elements between them and it, but they knew the direction. Helbig spoke with them briefly. He asked about the battalion, about the other companies, about officers. One of the men shook his head once and said something I did not hear clearly. Helbig's expression did not change. He asked about the Lieutenant Kuhnfels. The same man shook his head again, differently this time, and looked away. I watched Helbig absorb this. He took perhaps 3 seconds. Then he said something about the machine gun, about covering our movement, and the 2 men nodded and began repositioning the gun, and it was done. Whatever he had been told about Kuhnfels was done with for now. There was no place to put it yet. There would be a place later, if later came. For now, there was only the movement east, and the ground between us and whatever remained of the regiment. We added the 2 men to our group, 13 now, 4 of them unable to fight at full capacity. 1 machine gun, ammunition for perhaps 4 sustained bursts, rifles, stick grenades, the 11 anti-tank rounds that could not be fired at anything. I shifted Riedel's weight and looked east across the steppe. The sun was past its peak. The heat pressed down from above and rose from the ground simultaneously, and the air between smelled of the dry grass and something underneath it, something the heat was pulling up out of the earth, the smell of the last hours given back by the soil. In the distance, perhaps 3 kilometers east, I could see the rooftops of Verkhne-Buzinovka. There was smoke above the village. Thin columns of it, not the rolling black smoke of burning fuel, but the pale grey smoke of structures, thatch, wood, things that had been buildings until the tanks arrived. Helbig looked at it too. He said nothing about it. He looked down at the ground ahead of us, picked a line through the grass that used the low ground, and started walking. We followed. We heard them before we saw them, the same rhythmic tremor in the ground, but lighter this time, and coming from the east rather than the west, coming toward us. Helbig raised his fist, and we stopped. He went down on one knee and pressed his palm flat against the earth and held it there. He looked up and said something about tracks, about more than one. Then he pointed southeast toward a low fold 200 meters off, and we moved without any further discussion, moving fast, Pa and another man half carrying Riedel now because there was no longer time for the pace we had been keeping. We reached the fold and went into it, and Helbig was already up at the edge, looking southeast before the last man had dropped. The tanks came out of the low ground 250 meters away, 3 of them. T-34s, moving in a loose wedge, not the massed line of the morning, but a smaller group, a patrol or an advance element, moving northwest along roughly the same route we had been walking. Behind them, 20 or 30 meters back, a thin line of infantry, not hundreds this time, perhaps 40 men, and 3 tanks against 13 of us, 4 of whom were wounded. Helbig did not hesitate. He moved along the fold to the machine gun crew, crouched beside them, spoke for perhaps 10 seconds. Then he came back to me and Pa and said what we were going to do. The machine gun would take the infantry. We would wait until the tanks had passed our position before opening up, because once the gun fired, the tanks would turn, and the only thing keeping them from rolling over us was the fold, and the fold was not deep enough to stop a T-34. We needed the tanks past us before the shooting started. We needed the infantry separated from the armor. We had perhaps 30 seconds of ammunition in the gun, and after that we would move south into the deeper ravine system, and we would not stop moving. Power looked at me. I looked at the tanks. The wedge was closing, 150 meters. The lead T-34's hull filled the gap above the fold's edge. The wide, flat glacis plate, the long barrel of the main gun traversing slowly left and right as the commander scanned. 100 meters. The engine noise was back in the teeth. Riedel had pressed himself into the dirt and was not moving at all. The Gefreiter with the leg wounds had his rifle up, and Power leaned over and pushed the barrel down with 2 fingers and shook his head once, and the Gefreiter understood and lowered it. 80 meters, 70. The lead tank was almost level with our position, moving northwest, its left flank passing 20 meters from the fold's edge. Close enough to see the weld seams on the hull, close enough to see the mud caked around the track links, the mud of the Don's western bank, mud from a dozen positions like the one we had been in this morning. The tank passed, the second passed, the third. The infantry came through the gap behind the armor, strung out in a loose line, moving at a jog, trying to keep up. They were not watching the flanks. They were watching the tanks ahead of them and the ground at their feet and the distance between themselves and the armor that was supposed to protect them. They were not watching the fold, 30 meters to their right. The machine gun opened up. The sound of it was enormous in the flat country, and the first burst went through the middle of the infantry line, and men went down, and the men who did not go down scattered left and right, and the gun followed them left and then right, and then there was shouting from the Soviet soldiers, and from somewhere behind us, one of our men was shouting too, something I could not understand, and I was up and over the fold's edge and moving. I do not have a clear account of the next 4 minutes. What I have are pieces. A Soviet soldier on one knee in the grass, turning toward me, the muzzle of his rifle coming around, and the decision made before it was thought. The ground rushing past at a run. Power to my left, firing, moving, firing again. The crack of the T-34's guns from behind us, firing at something they could not clearly see, the rounds going wide and long into the empty steppe to the south. Another man from our group, a soldier I had not spoken to, going down in the grass 15 meters ahead of me, and then rising again, one hand pressed to his side, still moving. The Soviet infantrymen who had scattered, now some of them turning back, now some of them running east toward the tanks that were circling, and the decision by whomever was leading them, not to press back into the fire, but to regroup, to wait, to call on the armor. Which meant we had perhaps 90 seconds before the T-34s found an angle. Helbig was already moving south. He did not need to signal. Everyone still capable of moving was already moving south, into the ravine system he had identified from the fold's edge, the deeper ground that would give us cover from the tank's guns if we reached it before they repositioned. I got my arm back under Riedel's, and he pushed off the ground with his good arm, and we went. The first tank round hit 50 meters behind us. The pressure of it knocked Riedel half off his feet, and I pulled him back upright, and we kept moving. The second round hit further right, the tank correcting, guessing at where we had gone. By then, we were in the first ravine, down into the cut, the walls rising half a meter on each side, not enough to stop a tank, but enough to break the line of sight, enough to complicate the geometry. We moved south for 20 minutes without stopping. The tank sounds faded north and northeast as they searched the area we had left. They did not follow into the ravine system. Whether they could not or chose not, I did not know. It did not matter. They were not behind us, and we were still moving, and that was what mattered. When Helbig finally stopped us, it was in a broad ravine, deeper than the others, with a dry stream bed running along the bottom and low thorn bush along the banks that gave some concealment from above. He put power at the north end and the machine gun crew at the south, and then he came along the line and looked at each man. The soldier who had gone down in the grass was Auer. He was sitting with his back against the ravine wall and his hand still pressed to his side, and when Helbig crouched beside him and asked something, Auer moved his hand away and showed him, and then put his hand back. Helbig looked at it for a moment. He said something to the man nearest Auer, something about the field dressing in his kit, and the man nodded and got to work, and Helbig moved on. We were 9 men capable of fighting, 4 who were not. The machine gun with perhaps 2 bursts of ammunition remaining, rifles with varying amounts of rounds, no food, water for perhaps another hour between all of us. The sun was lower now. Still brutal, but moving toward the horizon with the indifference of something that had no part in what had happened in the grass today. The shadows in the ravine had lengthened, and the walls held the heat like brick. I sat with my back against the ravine wall, and I looked up at the strip of pale sky above, and I thought about nothing in particular and everything at once. The way the mind moves after a day like this one, skating across surfaces, refusing to go deep into any of it, reserving that for some other time that may or may not come. Paul came and sat beside me. He drank from his canteen, offered it. I shook my head. He put it away. After a while, he said something about the battalion, about the numbers, about what we had seen in the 300 meters of positions we had moved through that morning. He was not asking a question. He was saying a thing that needed to be said to someone, quietly, without drama, because that was the only way to carry it. I said something back, I don't remember what, something that acknowledged what he had said without adding to it. He nodded. He looked north, back toward the positions, toward the ground we had come from. Then he looked at his rifle and checked the magazine for the 3rd time that hour, which was not about the magazine. Helbig appeared at the ravine's edge above us and looked south, then north, then down at us. He said we would move again in 20 minutes. When it was darker, he said something about a rally point, about the regiment, about where the lines had been drawn back to. He said it matter-of-factly, as if these were administrative details, as if the day had been a march with complications, and now there was a route, and we would walk it. Nobody asked about the battalion again. Nobody asked about what the silence from the north had meant, or what the numbers added up to, or what had happened to the 300 men who had been here this morning and were not here now. Those were questions that belonged to a different time, to reports and tallies made in headquarters by men who had not been in the grass. For now, there was only the ravine and the 20 minutes and the movement that would come after it. Riedel had fallen asleep against the ravine wall, or something close to sleep. His breathing had steadied and his face had lost the locked quality it had held all afternoon. The Gefreiter with the leg wound sat nearby, his rifle across his knees, watching the ravine's north end with the focused attention of a man who has decided that watching is the one useful thing he can still do. I looked at them. I looked at Parr. I looked at Helbig, standing above us on the ravine's rim, still scanning, still holding the line between us and whatever was moving in the steppe behind us. The shadows reached the far wall of the ravine, and the sky above deepened from pale blue to something richer, and somewhere to the east, far enough away to be only sound and no meaning, artillery was firing. Not ours. The night was coming, and the regiment was somewhere ahead of us, and we had 20 minutes. Parr checked his magazine again. I watched the sky. If you want to experience this story in full, in a continuous audiobook format, without interruptions or ads, the complete version is available in the description. There's also an option that includes a written version of the story if you prefer to read along. And of course, it's a direct way to support our work, since the channel isn't monetized. If you're interested, you'll find everything in the link below.